auto growth settings and small fixed sizes for growth or percentage growth? I don't know. How many times have we seen this working with clients when we take a look at their system for the first time?
Yeah, this is one of the most common things that we run across. And it's easy to fix, it's easy to catch, but if you don't fix it, it's one that can cause massive problems, especially that percentage growth. This is one where it can be an exponential problem if you let it go without fixing this one.
So just to be clear here, we're not saying don't use auto growth, because I think you should use auto growth on every single database file you have. Because if you don't, and that file hits a point where it needs to grow, instead of growing and you don't have it turned on, it's just going to fail whatever transaction is currently running at that point. But what we're saying is don't use auto growth specifically with small fixed sizes. Like a lot of the time we'll have 1 megabyte or even 10 megabytes or 10% growth. Now, there's different reasons for why you go small, why you don't want to go small, or you don't want to go a percentage. So imagine you've got a brand new database file you've just created. It's just about empty. You allocate it for 10 megabytes. Great. That's way more space than you need right now because there's nothing in there. But then over time, you add tables and that database grows. And once that 10 megabytes gets full, it grows by 10% to 11 megabytes. And then once that's full, it grows by 10% to 12.1 megabytes, something like that. And it grows and grows and grows in all these small chunks. Well, at the time the database file grows or shrinks, like we talked about earlier with shrinking, is that there is some blocking that goes on in your system while it's happening. So what we recommend generally is auto growth settings that are sort of proportional to the size of the database. And we'll get to that in a second, but that are also related to the speed of I/O that you have. I mean, in a perfect world, you would expand all your files after hours in a maintenance window and never have auto growth occurring during the day. But the reality is that doesn't really happen all the time. So what we generally recommend, if you've got fast storage, is we go with larger auto growth settings. If you have slow storage, we go with smaller auto growth settings. But when we say larger or smaller, we're generally in like the 250 megabyte size up to a gig or 2 gigabyte size, depending on the size of your database. Now, if you've got a 100 megabyte database, maybe growing at 200 megabytes is not right. Maybe you want to grow it at 50 megabytes at a time. But if you've got a, I don't know, 1 terabyte database, you sure don't want to grow it in like 200 gigs at a time, because that's going to be really slow and inefficient. But you also don't want to grow it in like 1 megabyte sizes either. So we really recommend there, I mean, if I had a 1 terabyte database, it better be on fast storage. And I would usually probably go with a gigabyte of growth, or maybe 2 gigabytes of growth at that point. But if it was on a little bit slower storage, I might go smaller, like 500 megs or even 250 megs on a system like that. So that's one of those things that we do as part of our performance assessments, is we analyze all that and figure out what the best settings are for your databases and your environment. So mostly what I've talked about there has been data files. Mitch, you want to fill us in on what happens with log files and VLFs with these kind of growth patterns?
Yeah, so the VLFs, they can get really nasty, especially during stuff like recoveries. So your log file grows out in virtual log files. Each of these, especially if you have them set to the percentage, they get incrementally larger and larger and tack on to the end of your log file each time. What can happen is if you do need to do a recovery, doing this recovery with a bunch of VLFs, and especially large ones at the end, can make that recovery last a long time. We're talking hours if you try and do that without the right settings. So your growth settings need to be, your growth settings are especially important in your log files.
Yep. So let's take an example of a data file that you may have had incorrect growth settings on. Well, is there anything we can do to fix that? Well, really all we have to do is set the growth going forward on your data file and it'll be good. But like Mitch said, on the log file, if you've had it set incorrectly, it grows in those VLFs and you've got a lot of little chunks in there that eventually get bigger and bigger over time. Or maybe if you've got it a fixed size, they stay small over time. Well, we have the VLF report in Database Health Monitor. And what we oftentimes recommend in that case is, let's say the log file is the size it needs to be. what we'll oftentimes do after hours in a slow time in a maintenance window is shrink that log file as small as we can possibly get it and then expand it back out in chunks. So instead of having hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of virtual log files inside of that log, we end up with maybe 100 to 200, kind of that range is usually a more comfortable place to be. It gives you better manageability of your log files. So you can do all that with dbcc commands, or you can use the tools that we have in Database Health Monitor to help with that. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like it, please click the thumbs up icon. And if you want to subscribe, click subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we have new videos. All right, have a great day.